the billionaire CEO was stranded at the airport when a single dad offered her a ride. She almost refused. But 20 minutes later, she noticed something on the back seat that made her blood run cold. A small red-dressed doll. The exact doll her 7-year-old daughter had been holding the night she disappeared 6 years ago. Victoria picked it up with trembling hands. "Where did you get this?" The single dad looked confused. "My daughter found it." Victoria stared at him. "What's your daughter's name?" "Sarah." Then he said something that made Victoria's entire world stop. "She says the doll belonged to a little girl named Emma." Emma was Victoria's missing daughter. And suddenly, the ride home became the beginning of a mystery Victoria had spent 6 years trying to solve. Rain hammered against the windows of Kennedy Airport as Victoria Bennett stood beneath the terminal lights, staring at her phone. 11:38 p.m. Her driver was late. Not 5 minutes late. Not 10. Almost 40 minutes. Victoria called again. No answer. She exhaled slowly and looked through the glass doors at the dark parking lot. She hated being late. But tonight, it wasn't a business meeting she was worried about. It was her daughter. Emma was 7 years old. And Victoria had promised her she would be home before midnight. That promise mattered. 6 years earlier, Victoria had made another promise. She had promised herself she would find Emma. Emma had disappeared from a children's hospital when she was only 1 year old. The case had become one of the most painful mysteries in Victoria's life. There had been police investigations, private investigators, security teams, thousands of photographs, hundreds of interviews. Nothing. Emma had simply vanished during a chaotic hospital evacuation. The only thing missing from her hospital room was her favorite doll. A small handmade doll with brown yarn hair, one blue button eye, a faded red dress and a tiny stitched heart. Victoria had searched for that doll for years. She never found it. Until tonight. A dark gray SUV slowly pulled toward the airport curb. The driver's window lowered. A man around his late 30s looked toward her. "Need a ride?" Victoria immediately shook her head. "No, thank you." The man nodded politely. "No problem." He began driving away. Victoria looked at her phone. 11:42. Then she looked at the rain. Then at the empty road. Wait. The SUV stopped. The man looked back. "I'm going toward Manhattan." Victoria hesitated. "So am I. I can drop you off." She studied him carefully. He wasn't dressed like a chauffeur. No expensive suit. No security earpiece. No company vehicle. Just a simple navy jacket and gray shirt. There was also a child's car seat in the back. Victoria pointed toward it. "You have a child?" The man smiled. "A daughter." "How old?" 7. Victoria's expression softened. "My daughter is 7 too." The man smiled. "I'm Daniel." "Victoria." She opened the passenger door. 20 minutes. 20 minutes. She climbed inside. The SUV smelled faintly of coffee and children's shampoo. A small backpack rested on the back seat. A pink jacket. A stuffed rabbit. A children's book. Victoria looked at them briefly. Then her eyes stopped. She saw the doll. Her breathing stopped. Brown yarn hair. One blue button eye. Red dress. Tiny stitched heart. Victoria slowly turned toward the back seat. "Where did you get that?" Daniel glanced into the mirror. "The doll." "Yes. My daughter found it." Victoria stared at him. "Your daughter?" "Sarah." "How old is Sarah?" 7. Victoria's heart began beating faster. Where did she find the doll? At an old children's clinic. Victoria's face changed. What clinic? Daniel gave her the name. She knew it. It was connected to the hospital where Emma had disappeared. Victoria's voice became quiet. "Pull over." Daniel looked concerned. "Are you okay? Please." He pulled the SUV toward the side of the road. Victoria turned around and carefully picked up the doll. Her fingers trembled. She knew it. The crooked red dress. The missing button. The small scratch beneath one eye. This was Emma's doll. There was no doubt. Victoria turned it over. Beneath the dress was a tiny stitched letter. E. Her daughter's initial. Victoria closed her eyes. Daniel watched her through the mirror. Victoria. She finally spoke. This belonged to my daughter. Daniel looked confused. Your daughter? Emma. He waited. Victoria swallowed hard. She disappeared 6 years ago. Daniel's expression changed. I'm sorry. Victoria looked down at the doll. Where exactly did Sarah find it? At the clinic I mentioned. When? About 2 months ago. Was she alone? Yes. Did she find anything else? Daniel thought for a moment. Not that I know. Victoria stared at him. Then Daniel added, actually, Sarah did mention something strange. Victoria immediately looked up. What? She said another little girl gave her the doll. Victoria's heart stopped. What little girl? Sarah called her Emma. Victoria couldn't move. The rain continued hitting the windshield. Daniel looked at her. I thought it was just a coincidence. Victoria shook her head. It isn't. Why? Because my daughter had brown hair. Daniel's face became serious. And Emma disappeared when she was 1. Silence. Victoria looked at the doll. She would be 7 now. Daniel slowly understood. Like Sarah. Exactly. Victoria looked toward him. Take me to Sarah. Daniel hesitated. She's staying with my sister tonight. Then take me there. It's almost midnight. I know. Victoria's voice cracked. I've been looking for my daughter for 6 years. Daniel didn't argue again. He started the SUV. 25 minutes later, they arrived outside a quiet house in Queens. Daniel's sister Rachel opened the door. Daniel. Then she noticed Victoria. Her eyes widened. Is that? Where's Sarah? Daniel interrupted. Upstairs. They walked upstairs. Sarah was asleep in her bedroom. Daniel gently touched her shoulder. Sweetheart. Sarah opened her eyes. Daddy. There is someone here who wants to talk to you. Sarah looked toward Victoria. Her eyes immediately moved to the doll in Victoria's hands. That's Emma's. Victoria slowly knelt beside her. Sarah. The little girl looked at her. You're the lady from the picture. Victoria froze. What picture? Sarah reached beneath her pillow. She pulled out a small photograph. Victoria took it. Her hands began shaking. It was a photograph of herself holding Emma. 6 years earlier. Victoria stared at it. Where did you get this? Sarah answered simply. Emma gave it to me. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Daniel looked at his daughter. Sarah, when did you meet Emma? At the clinic. Victoria whispered. What did she say? Sarah looked at her. She said her mommy was looking for her. Victoria covered her mouth. For 6 years, she had searched for her daughter. Now a 7-year-old girl was telling her that Emma had been alive. Victoria reached toward Sarah. Where is she? Sarah looked down. I don't know. Did Emma tell you anything else? Sarah nodded. She told me to keep Mimi safe. Victoria looked at the doll. Mimi. Sarah nodded. That's what Emma called her. Victoria stood slowly. Then Sarah suddenly grabbed Daniel's sleeve. Daddy. Daniel looked down. What? Sarah's face became frightened. Don't take them to the clinic. Victoria froze. Why? Sarah looked directly at her. Then whispered. Because the man who took Emma might still be there. Sarah's words left Victoria completely silent. Because the man who took Emma might still be there. Daniel looked at his daughter. What man? Sarah lowered her eyes. I don't know his name. Victoria knelt beside her. Sarah, please. Tell me everything you remember. Sarah looked toward the doll. Emma told me not to talk about him. Why? Because he told her that if she talked, he would never let her see her mommy. Victoria's heart broke. She gently touched Sarah's shoulder. Emma never stopped thinking about me? Sarah shook her head. She talked about you all the time. Victoria closed her eyes. For 6 years, she had imagined Emma alone. Now she knew her daughter had been carrying memories of her. Daniel crouched beside Sarah. When did you meet Emma? At the clinic. The old children's clinic. Sarah nodded. I used to go there with Aunt Rachel. Daniel looked at Rachel. You knew. Rachel looked uncomfortable. Sarah volunteered there sometimes. She liked giving toys to the children. Victoria looked at Sarah. And Emma was there? Yes. How old was she? Sarah thought for a moment. She was little when I first met her. But she got bigger. Victoria's heart pounded. How long did you know her? Almost 2 years. Daniel and Victoria exchanged a look. 2 years. That meant Emma had been alive long after the disappearance. Victoria stood. We're going there. Daniel looked at her. Tonight. Yes. Victoria, if someone really is watching that place. I don't care. She looked at him. My daughter was there. Daniel understood. He grabbed his jacket. Then I'm coming with you. Victoria nodded. They left Sarah with Rachel. Before Victoria walked out, Sarah ran toward her. She held the doll tightly. Take Mimi. Victoria looked surprised. Why? Emma wanted you to have her. Victoria accepted the doll. Sarah whispered. She said you'll know what to do. Victoria hugged the little girl. Thank you. Then she followed Daniel downstairs. The old children's clinic was nearly 40 minutes away. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet. Daniel drove carefully. Victoria sat beside him, holding the doll. For most of the journey, neither spoke. Finally Daniel said, There's something you should know. Victoria looked at him. What? I used to work security at that clinic. She stared. You did? Yes. When? 6 years ago. Victoria's heart skipped. You were there when Emma disappeared? Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Yes. Victoria turned toward him. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know who you were. What happened that night? Daniel took a slow breath. The hospital was being evacuated. Everyone was confused. Children were moved between departments. Where was Emma? I don't know. You must have seen something. I saw hundreds of people. Victoria's voice became sharper. My daughter disappeared. I know. Daniel looked at her. And I've regretted that night ever since. Victoria softened. What did you see? Daniel thought carefully. A man carrying a child. Victoria's heart stopped. Emma. I can't be sure. What did the man look like? Dark coat. Tall. Maybe early 40s. Did you see his face? Only for a second. Do you remember anything else? Daniel nodded. He had a silver watch. Victoria stared at him. Anything unusual? Daniel looked toward the road. There was a small scar on his left hand. Victoria immediately remembered someone. Richard Cole, the hospital administrator. He had a silver watch, and a thin scar across his left hand. Richard, she whispered. Daniel looked at her. Who? Richard Cole. Daniel's face changed. I remember that name. He worked at the hospital. Daniel nodded. He was there that night. Victoria's breathing became faster. Did you see him? I saw him near the pediatric wing. Then why didn't anyone suspect him? Because he was helping evacuate children. Victoria looked at the doll. What if he wasn't? The rest of the drive was silent. The clinic appeared through the darkness. Its windows were broken. The old sign hung crookedly above the entrance. Daniel parked several yards away. Victoria stared at the building. I remember this place. You've been here. After Emma disappeared. They walked toward the entrance. Daniel pushed the door open. The smell of dust and old medicine filled the hallway. Victoria's memories returned. She remembered walking through these halls 6 years earlier, calling Emma's name, begging nurses for answers, finding nothing. Daniel switched on his flashlight. Basement should be this way. They reached a stairwell. Victoria stopped. Wait. What? She pointed toward the wall. A faded number was painted beside the stairs. 17. Her heart began pounding. That's it. They descended. The basement was dark and cold. Rows of old cabinets lined the walls. Daniel searched through them. Victoria opened drawers one after another. Then she found a folder. Her hands trembled. Emma Bennett. She opened it. Inside was Emma's hospital photograph. The same face Victoria had seen every night in her dreams. She turned the next page. A transfer record. Victoria stared. Why was this never in the police report? Daniel looked over her shoulder. The document showed Emma had been transferred from the pediatric ward during the evacuation. But the destination had been blacked out. Someone had deliberately removed it. Victoria turned the page. There was a handwritten note. Transfer approved, R.C. Victoria's face went pale. Richard Cole. Daniel nodded. He moved her. Victoria's hands began shaking. Why? We don't know. Daniel searched the cabinet again. He found another file. This one contained an address. Pine Ridge Children's Residence. Victoria looked at him. That's where he took her. Maybe. Then they heard a sound. Footsteps. Both froze. Someone was walking above them. Daniel turned off the flashlight. The footsteps became louder. One step. Then another. Victoria whispered, "Someone's here." Daniel placed himself between Victoria and the stairs. The footsteps stopped. Then a man's voice echoed through the basement. "You were never supposed to find that file." Victoria's heart dropped. She knew the voice. "Richard." Silence. Daniel moved toward the stairs. "Show yourself." A figure appeared at the top. A tall man in a dark coat. Gray hair. Cold expression. A silver watch on his wrist. And a thin scar across his left hand. Victoria recognized him instantly. Richard Cole. "You," she whispered. Richard looked at her. "You should have stayed home." Victoria stepped forward. "Where is my daughter?" Richard smiled. "You still don't understand. You took her. I protected her." Victoria's eyes filled with anger. "You stole my child." Richard's expression changed. "Your company was collapsing 6 years ago." "What? Your father had secrets." Victoria stared. Richard continued. "Emma became useful." Daniel stepped forward. "Useful for what?" Richard looked at him. "You were there that night." Daniel froze. "You remember me?" Richard smiled. "You were the security guard who looked the other way." Daniel's face hardened. "I didn't know." "You should have." Victoria stepped toward Richard. "Where is Emma?" Richard backed away. "Ask yourself why she remembers you." Victoria froze. "What does that mean?" Richard turned and ran. Daniel chased him up the stairs. Victoria followed. By the time they reached the entrance, Richard was gone. But something was lying on the wet pavement. An envelope. Victoria picked it up. Inside was a photograph. A little girl standing beside a window. Brown hair. Blue eyes. Red ribbon. Victoria's hands began trembling. It was Emma. Alive. On the back of the photograph were 4 words. "She remembers you, Elm." Victoria pressed the photograph against her chest. Daniel looked toward the dark road. Then he noticed something else. A black SUV was parked across the street. Its headlights suddenly turned on. Daniel grabbed Victoria's arm. "Get down." The SUV accelerated. It sped toward them. Daniel pulled Victoria behind the clinic's concrete wall. The vehicle raced past and disappeared into the darkness. Victoria looked at him. "Who was that?" Daniel stared after the SUV. "I don't know." Victoria looked at the photograph again. Her tears returned. Emma was alive. But someone was still watching them. And now they knew exactly where Victoria was looking. Victoria stood behind the concrete wall, clutching Emma's photograph against her chest. The black SUV had disappeared into the night. Daniel slowly looked around the empty street. "Stay here." Victoria shook her head. "No. We're leaving." They returned to the car and drove away from the clinic. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then Victoria looked at the photograph again. "She's alive." Daniel nodded. "And Richard knows where she is." Victoria looked at him. "Then we need to find her before he does." Daniel remembered the address from the hospital file. Pine Ridge Children's Residence. He entered it into his navigation. The drive took nearly 3 hours. They arrived just before sunrise. The children's residence was a small building surrounded by tall trees. An elderly woman opened the door. She looked at Victoria, then at the photograph. Her face immediately changed. "Emma." Victoria stepped forward. "You know her?" The woman nodded slowly. "She lived here." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "How long?" "Almost 4 years." "Where is she now?" The woman hesitated. "She left 2 months ago." Victoria's heart sank. "Who took her?" "No one." "Then where did she go?" The woman looked toward the hallway. "She went looking for you." Victoria couldn't breathe. "She knew who I was." "She always knew." The woman explained that Richard Cole had brought Emma to the residence using false documents. He told everyone Emma had no family. But Emma never believed him. She kept a photograph of Victoria. She kept talking about her mother. And she kept the doll. Victoria looked down at the photograph in her hands. Why did she give the doll to Sarah? The woman smiled sadly. Because Sarah was kind to her. Daniel looked surprised. Sarah visited here? Often. Victoria finally understood why Sarah knew Emma. The two girls had become friends. Sarah brought Emma toys. Emma told Sarah stories about her mother. One day, Emma gave Sarah the doll. She told her, "If my mommy ever comes, give this back to her." Victoria closed her eyes. 6 years. Her daughter had been waiting. The woman handed Victoria a folded piece of paper. She left this behind. Victoria opened it. A child's handwriting filled the page. "Mommy, if you find this, don't be scared. I know you love me." Victoria began crying. Daniel stood beside her quietly. Then he noticed something written beneath the message. An address. The old Bennett family lake house. Victoria stared. Emma went there. Daniel nodded. Then that's where we go. They reached the lake house just after sunrise. The old building looked exactly as Victoria remembered it. She had brought Emma there when she was a baby. They used to sit beside the lake. Emma loved the water. Victoria slowly opened the front door. Emma. No answer. They searched the living room, the kitchen, the upstairs bedrooms. Nothing. Then Victoria heard a tiny sound. A floorboard creaked behind her. She turned. A little girl stood at the end of the hallway. Brown hair, blue eyes, red ribbon. Victoria couldn't breathe. Emma. The girl stared at her, then whispered, "Mommy." Victoria dropped to her knees. Emma ran into her arms. Victoria held her daughter tightly. "I'm sorry." Emma cried against her shoulder. "I knew you'd come. I never stopped looking." Emma pulled away. "You took too long." Victoria laughed through her tears. "I know." Daniel watched silently. Emma looked at him. "You're Sarah's daddy." Daniel smiled. "Yes." Emma nodded. "Sarah said you'd help my mommy." Victoria looked at Daniel. What did Sarah know? Emma explained that Sarah had helped her hide the doll. She had told Sarah to give it to her mother if they ever met. "But why did you leave the children's home?" Emma's expression changed. "Richard came." Victoria froze. "When?" 2 months ago." "What did he want?" He wanted to take me somewhere else. Why? Emma lowered her voice. He said you were getting close. Victoria felt anger rising. Where was he taking you? I don't know. Then Emma suddenly grabbed Victoria's hand. He knows I'm here. Daniel looked toward the window. Outside, a black vehicle was parked near the road. Daniel's expression hardened. We need to go. Victoria held Emma close. But before they could move, headlights appeared behind the house. Another vehicle. They were surrounded. Daniel looked at Victoria. Take Emma to the back door. What about you? I'll follow. A car door slammed outside. Then another. Victoria grabbed Emma's hand. They moved toward the back hallway. Suddenly, a man's voice came from outside. Victoria! She stopped. Richard! His voice echoed through the house. You found your daughter. Victoria held Emma tighter. Richard continued. But you still don't know why I took her. Victoria looked at Daniel. Daniel shook his head. Don't answer. Then Richard said something that made Victoria's blood run cold. Ask your daughter who her father really is. Victoria froze. She looked at Emma. Emma's face became pale. And Daniel realized there was one secret Emma had never told her mother. Victoria stared at Emma. Richard's words echoed through the house. Ask your daughter who her father really is. For a moment, nobody moved. Emma's small hand tightened around Victoria's fingers. Victoria looked down at her daughter. Emma, what does he mean? Emma's eyes filled with tears. I didn't want to tell you. Tell me what? Emma looked toward the window. Richard said you would be angry. Victoria knelt in front of her. Emma, nothing you tell me will make me angry with you. Emma swallowed. He said Daddy was alive. Victoria froze. Daniel looked at her. Your husband. Victoria shook her head. Emma's father wasn't my husband. She paused. His name was Michael. Emma nodded. I saw him. Victoria's heart began pounding. Where? At the house. What house? The house where Richard kept me. Victoria stared at her daughter. You lived with Michael? Emma shook her head. He visited. Daniel looked toward the window. Richard is trying to manipulate you. Victoria nodded. I know. Then a loud crash came from the front of the house. Emma jumped. Daniel immediately moved toward the hallway. Stay here. Victoria pulled Emma behind her. Daniel looked through the window. 3 men were entering the house. Richard stood behind them. Back door, Daniel whispered. Victoria nodded. She grabbed Emma's hand. They moved toward the kitchen. Daniel followed. The 3 men entered the living room. Richard's voice echoed through the house. Victoria, you can't run forever. Victoria opened the back door. They stepped outside. But a man was already standing near the lake. He blocked their path. Daniel immediately stepped forward. Move. The man shook his head. Daniel pushed him aside and grabbed Victoria's arm. Run. They moved toward the trees. Emma stayed between Victoria and Daniel. They reached the old boathouse. Daniel closed the door behind them. Victoria whispered, How do we get out? Daniel pointed toward the lake. There's an old boat. They moved toward it. Then Emma stopped. Mom. Victoria turned. What? Emma pointed toward a wooden box beneath the floorboards. Richard told me never to open that. Daniel looked at Victoria. That's probably why he came here. Victoria opened the box. Inside were old documents, photographs, a flash drive, and a letter. Victoria picked up the letter. The name at the top made her freeze. Michael Bennett, her daughter's father. She opened it. The letter was dated 6 years earlier. It explained everything. Michael had discovered that Richard was involved in an illegal medical data operation. He had tried to expose him. Richard threatened him. Then Emma disappeared. Michael had been searching for her too. Victoria read the final line. If anything happens to me, Emma must never be told that I abandoned her. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Emma. Your father didn't leave you. Emma looked confused. He was looking for you. Is he alive? Victoria didn't know. Before she could answer, the boathouse door opened. Richard stood there. Give me the flash drive. Daniel stepped in front of Victoria. No. Richard raised a gun. Victoria pulled Emma behind her. Richard looked at Daniel. You should have stayed out of this. Daniel didn't move. You took a child. Richard's expression hardened. I protected a secret. What secret? Richard looked at Victoria. Your father's company was using hospital technology to secretly collect patient information. Victoria stared at him. My father. Your father knew. Victoria shook her head. You're lying. Richard pointed toward the flash drive. Everything is on there. Daniel looked at Victoria. Give it to the police. Richard laughed. You think the police can protect you? Then another voice came from outside. They can when there's evidence. Everyone froze. Police officers surrounded the boathouse. Victoria had secretly activated the emergency alert on her phone earlier. Richard looked furious. He tried to escape through the side door. Daniel tackled him. The gun fell. Police rushed inside. Richard was handcuffed. Victoria held Emma tightly. For the first time in 6 years, she knew her daughter was safe. The investigation lasted several months. The flash drive contained everything. Financial records, hospital files, illegal contracts, and proof that Richard had falsified Emma's transfer records. He had hidden her because he feared she might eventually lead investigators back to him. Michael had discovered the operation. Richard had tried to silence him. But Michael survived. He had been living under another name while searching for Emma. When Victoria finally found him, he was standing outside the hospital. Older, tired, but alive. Victoria stared at him. Michael looked toward Emma. Then tears filled his eyes. Emma. She slowly walked toward him. Are you my daddy? Michael nodded. Yes. Emma hugged him. Victoria watched them. For years, she had believed she had lost both of them. Now they were standing in front of her. Alive. Together. Michael looked at Victoria. I'm sorry. Victoria shook her head. We both lost 6 years. He nodded. But we found her. Victoria looked at Emma. That's what matters. Months later, Victoria's life looked completely different. She still ran her company. She still attended board meetings. She still had billions of dollars. But she no longer measured her life by business deals. She measured it by moments. Breakfast with Emma. School pickups. Weekend trips. Family dinners. And the little things she had once missed. Daniel remained part of their lives too. Sarah and Emma became best friends. One afternoon, the two girls sat in Victoria's garden. The old doll rested between them. Sarah carefully repaired the red dress. Emma watched. Do you remember when you gave me Mimi? Sarah smiled. Yes. I thought I'd never see Mommy again. Sarah looked toward Victoria. But you did. Emma nodded. Because Daddy helped. Daniel stood nearby. Victoria walked toward him. I still can't believe one ride changed everything. Daniel smiled. You were the one who asked me to stop. Victoria laughed. True. She looked at the old doll. I thought that doll represented everything I had lost. Daniel looked at her. And now? Victoria smiled. Now it reminds me that sometimes something can disappear without being gone forever. Daniel nodded. Emma suddenly ran toward them. Mom. Victoria turned. What? Come look. She pulled Victoria toward the garden. Sarah was holding the doll. Both girls were laughing. Victoria smiled. Daniel stood beside her. For 6 years, Victoria had searched for Emma with money, investigators, and powerful connections. But the answer had arrived in the most ordinary way imaginable. A rainy airport. A single dad. One unexpected ride. and a little doll sitting quietly in the back seat. Victoria looked at Daniel. "Thank you." Daniel smiled. "For what?" "For stopping." He shook his head. "I just gave you a ride." Victoria looked at Emma. "No." She smiled. "You gave me my daughter back." Daniel didn't answer. He simply looked at the two girls laughing in the garden. And for a moment, nobody needed to say anything else. Because sometimes the biggest miracles don't arrive with headlines. Sometimes they arrive quietly. In an ordinary car. On an ordinary rainy night. Hidden beneath a child's jacket. Waiting for someone to recognize them. And Victoria Bennett would never forget the moment she saw that little red dress. Because she thought she was looking at a doll. But she was really looking at the first piece of her daughter that had finally found its way home.